As Andy said, I've gone on record saying that I believe it's possible to bring an end to extreme poverty, and that's obviously that is a bold claim. And if there's a group that I'm probably most anxious about trying to discuss this with, it's actually you guys, right? I've discovered that the young people out there that maybe haven't been abroad or haven't engaged the full scope of the issues, they're ready to go. Yeah, got to do that. It's the older folks who've been there 20 years and come back with these very sophisticated understandings of transformational development that are the scary ones to talk to about this prospect. So thank you for your prayers, and please, I pray also for an open mind, even amongst us. Did you know the Accord tagline is empowering the Christian community to end poverty? And as you think about that and wonder what your organization is part of that, you're part of this network, you pay dues to be part of that. And are you serious? Really? End poverty? I remember when we talked about that several years ago, somebody kind of raised their hand and said, I'm not so sure. So I just want you to know that I totally understand that skepticism. Okay? I'm a skeptic myself, always have been. Really ever since I was a baby. I was born a skeptical baby. My mom nicknamed me the judge because I never smiled. I didn't have much reason to smile in my worldview at the time. I had a hard childhood. So I was born a skeptical person, kind of always stayed that way. Until I became a Christian. I became a Christian through Young Life, late in high school. Have you all heard of Young Life? Yeah, good organization. And it was through Young Life, actually. I was on this trip, and I met this girl. I was 17 years old, and I met this girl, and I just fell in love. I mean, gone, fell in love, right? It happens to 17-year-old young men. And I fell in love with this girl on this trip, got home, and I remember the day after that return, I was sitting at the kitchen table, and my mom was over there doing the dishes, and I'm just sitting at the table with this big grin on my head, you know, just smiling, just kind of thinking about Bethany, right? And my mom, I mean, this is the judge over here smiling like, you know, that, and she stops doing the dishes and hesitantly looks over at me with a little suspicion, and she says, Scott, are you on drugs? And I said, no, I met the woman I'm going to marry. I'm 17 years old. I couldn't believe these words are coming out of my own mouth, right? But there they were. And you know what? 3 years later I did, and we've been married for 22 years. So God is good, and He's worked through Bethany to keep me smiling a lot more ever since. A lot of us get rescued from that place of kind of, you know, cynical frowniness into better places because God brings love into our lives. In my case, my wife Bethany was and is used by God. So we started having kids. Andy mentioned that I have some sons. I remember the day when I could fit all three of these guys in a wheelbarrow. You know, that was the good old days, and it was a lot of fun having boys. It was a blast. But then things change fast, don't they? You know, the next thing I know, they're looking like this, and how did that happen? You know, I know people say they grow up fast, but somehow these moments surprise us. And it's not like we don't want this, right? We want them to get taller than us, and stronger than us, and faster than us, and better looking than us, and, you know, smarter than us. We want that, but I couldn't help but remember these early days when I used to run with my oldest son. He and I would do these road races together, and finish with moments like this where, you know, good job, son, because, you know, I'd run slow so that we could run this thing together. And finishing races like this where we'd celebrate a proud moment of triumph for him, for Micah. And so I should have known things were changing, that the world wasn't the same when the finish line started. But I stayed in denial. I did. I managed to deny the fact that this was happening for several years after this moment. It was, and then there were these other things that happened where you just look at it and see your kids doing things like, I don't even know quite. Good job, son. You know, it'd be even better if your lines weren't so squiggly. Is that a two? You know, so these kids, they grow up. Well, I think God, in His mercy, knew I couldn't handle this kids growing up thing. And so he decided to bless us with a fourth son just recently. This is Levi. And he brought Levi, and Levi's now 5 years old, and not that long ago, beginning of this school year, this was him on his first day of kindergarten. And I look at this guy, and as we all think about Levi, the 5-year-old, on his first day of school, we should ask this question: what will his world be like? What will be normal for him? What will his church look like? What are all those things that we, think are the way things are? We don't know what his world will look like, but it sure won't look like this one. It's changing too fast. So when we ask that question, what will his world look like? I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about that. Hard to predict that answer, but I see, and the title of this talk is The Awakening Church, I see changes. And I know you see these changes too. And so I'd like to highlight for us a few of those macro scale changes that are underway, specifically in the church, that might help us imagine what Levi's world might look like. So, not that long ago, I guess it was about five or 6 years ago, I was considering a position working for Compassion in Rwanda. And I was praying about that and seeking God's guidance. And some of my friends who are a bit older and had lived abroad and stuff, they used to share the stories about what it's like. And they would share things about standing in line at the post office for 3 hours just to send a letter, or how hard it was just to pay the electric bill, or things like that. And so, now, I had been in a number of places prior to this, but this moment really struck me because I had just left some of this perspective and landed in Kigali, and my wife Bethany was able to join me as we were considering this together. And in Kigali, I was able to walk into a coffee shop where I could flip open my laptop, hook on to the Wi-Fi, and send an email. And you've been there, right? Many of you have been there. You've been to places where you feel like this should be far, and instead you go into these places and you see a lot of people who, they look like they just walked out of Southern California, and in Kigali they probably did, because, Rick Warren is busy with his peace plan saying we want tens of thousands of Southern Californians in Kigali. That'll help. So, sorry, we'll get to that later. So, you walk in and you see these people sipping cappuccinos and they're on their laptops and they're like updating their Facebook with, dude, you won't believe where I am. And you're thinking, this isn't the same world. This isn't the same world that was described to me. It's a different world. The church is connecting globally in an unprecedented way. And we're sort of riding the effect of globalization and participating in that. That has huge implications. Well, it turns out Rwanda is not the only country receiving a lot of visitors. This is a trend line showing the number of North American Christians who are traveling abroad in some form of cross-cultural ministry experience, call it a mission trip, what you will. Look at that. We are crossing well past the 2 million a year mark. Now, a Barna survey was just done a few weeks ago in which the question of whether the survey participant had been abroad on such a trip, described as a trip outside the United States for the purpose of ministry to the poor. All right, that was the nature of the question. 20% of Protestants and 16% of Catholics have been abroad on that kind of a trip. 1 out of 5. That is staggering because it's leading to a new relationship. It used to be missions was some guy comes back from far away, has a slideshow, passes the special offering plate, and you see that and you go, thank you for being the one to go there, that's far away and a little scary. And that was the level of engagement, right? And now, our youth groups travel, right, to these places. And so we have now formed a direct relationship. And that is changing the DNA in the church. There is a new era of global connectedness. Speaking of Rick Warren, y'all read this book or heard about this book, Purpose-Driven Life? A lot of nodding heads. 30 million copies. Okay, that's incredible. I remember in 2004, I was in Kenya, and I go into our country office there to join my brothers and sisters in devotions. And when I went into our Kenyan office, There are Compassion Kenya staff gathered around the table for devotions, and they're going through the purpose-driven life. And again, it's just one of those collision moments that a pastor in Southern California writes a book, and now our Kenyan brothers and sisters are going through that in their devotions. Well, you know what? The staggering influence that this book had made me curious about something, so I searched it using the Google text search for the word poor, the word poverty, and the word justice. The word poor is used twice, both kind of incidentally. Poverty doesn't even happen in that book. Justice isn't addressed. How is it possible for a pastor to write a book with such staggering influence about the purpose and the way in which we live out our faith, to take this gigantic, major theme in Scripture that we all know about and completely miss it? That's pretty impressive. And then now, if you ask for people to name a Christian leader who is a passionate advocate for the poor, Rick Warren will be one of the first names you hear. That change happened in like 2 years. It was an incredible change, and that is a symbol or a case study in what I believe God is doing in our generation. The first decade of the 21st century has seen a radical shift. And speaking of radical, how about this book? Have some of y'all seen this one? A few of you, I highly encourage you to read it. If this book is on the bestseller list at the first part, 2005-ish, this is on the bestseller list now. Listen to what David Platt writes in Radical. For the sake of 26,000 children who will die today from starvation or preventable disease, I want to risk it all. If our lives do not reflect a radical compassion for the poor, there is reason to wonder if Christ is really in us at all. Those are very powerful words, and a far cry from completely overlooking the subject. He goes on to write, you and I have a choice. We can stand with the starving or with the overfed. We can identify with poor Lazarus on his way to heaven or with the rich man on his way to hell. We can embrace Jesus while we give away our wealth, or we can walk away from Jesus while we hoard it. This is on the bestseller list for Christians in the United States. This was written for American Christians. And to me, what this represents, again, sort of like what happened at Saddleback with Rick Warren, is a sign, a symbol, a case study, a moment that we can see it. The church is awakening to the whole gospel. We're awakening to the whole world and experiencing a new era of global connectedness and new relationships. And we are awakening to the whole gospel. And I think those two things are going together. Because now when you go to churches, it's harder and harder to find one that is either indifferent to the poor or not already doing something, right? So there's this new level of engagement, a new understanding of integral mission or holistic mission, or however you want to phrase that. And associated with this question about what are we doing with our wealth, we can look at those trends. These are the trend lines for giving to international affairs between 1970 and 2010. There has been an 800% increase in giving to international causes across the span from 1987 to 2008. That is incredibly good news. And I know that that seems hard to accept in some ways, but that's what's happening. And if you look at how that giving increase compares to other categories of giving, such as human services or arts and culture, those kinds of things, what you see is that some are going down, some are going a little bit up, but look what we did. Giving to international causes up 17% between those years of 2008 and 2010. That's incredible. There's a tremendous amount of optimism that we gain seeing that trend. Where's that giving coming from? I mean, this is private giving, of course. We're not talking about government. We all know the government's tanking right now on that. But the giving is coming from individuals. 73% of that generosity from individuals. So we are living in a time where Christians are awakening to the whole world. They are awakening and embracing new relationships. They are awakening to the whole gospel and understanding that the way they live out their faith in this world matters, and that is provoking, or it's at least correlated with, a new kind of generosity. And folks, Peter said it last night. I know some of your organizations really feel the effects of the government's decisions. But the church has got all the resources. Every dollar you could possibly need to do what God has called you to do is, first of all, it's God's, but He has entrusted that to His people in a way that we haven't even begun to imagine the possibilities of. The 138 million church-going Christians in this country alone, 138 million of us who attend church regularly and say our faith is very important to us, collectively earn an annual income of $2.5 trillion. $2.5 trillion. If that group was its own country, it would be the 7th wealthiest country in the world. Just that group. And currently giving is pegged at about 2.9%. But even a modest increase in that generosity, the kinds of things we're seeing here, it far outstrips, any of our budgetary needs. So it's an exciting time, and as we look at those trend lines. I'll tell you about a personal experience that I had early as director of the AIDS Initiative of Compassion. This was in Tanzania in 2005, and we were in Tanzania specifically because there were struggles getting kids on antiretroviral drugs, the medicines that treat HIV. And I had the opportunity to visit with Jacqueline. She was 12 when I took this photo, and I'll fast forward through the story to say that I met Jacqueline, and it was the day after we had just secured an agreement with a local clinic to provide the antiretrovirals that she needed. She was born with HIV. She watched both of her parents die of that disease, and in the care of her grandmother, I knelt in that dirt, and I prayed for her, that she would be the first child in Tanzania to be on those medicines, that we would be able to witness in her life what we've seen in so many other children's lives across East Africa, that kind of Lazarus effect, as they say, the recovery to near normal health. And so I prayed for her with optimism and with hope, because I'd seen that before, because I believed that God could do this in her life, that we would watch her grow up and become the young lady that God designed her to be. Listen to her sing, watch her play. When I left that afternoon, the next day, our staff took her to that local clinic. She began antiretroviral therapy. I got on the plane. When I landed, I got a message from Tanzania: Jacqueline's dead. And I've been with a lot of kids who died. I've been with kids who've been abused and left to die, and I don't know why, but that hurt. That loss really, because we missed it. We missed the chance to save her life, maybe by a day. And I made a commitment in that moment that we would not be too late again. With every bit of influence, with everything that God might have trusted me, that I would work to not be too late again, because we didn't have to be. We didn't have to be too late. That became a strong personal motivation, but of course, Jacqueline's not alone. Every day, 21,000 children die from preventable causes. And you know these statistics. These are the 21,000 children that are the children of the extreme poor, the 1.4 billion people who live in extreme poverty, life on less than $1.25 a day. We talk about poverty, we need definition. If we're talking about ending extreme poverty, we've got to be very specific about what we mean. So now I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about spiritual poverty. I'm not talking about a metaphor of some kind. I'm not talking about relative poverty. Obviously, you always, by definition, have the bottom 5% in the income bracket. I'm talking about a kind of poverty in which children die from preventable causes, things like a lack of antibiotics, or dirty water, or they don't have enough food to eat because the income levels are simply insufficient. That even if you spent it all on nutrition of some kind, you would not meet your basic caloric intake needs. Extreme economic poverty, that's what we're talking about here. And it matters that we're clear about that, because some people hear this talk about ending poverty and they think, well, you can't end poverty until you end sin. I'll get to that in a bit. Let me interrupt us here, though, and say, what do you expect? I mean, you know these stories. You've probably experienced these stories. You've seen these challenges. What are your expectations for the future of the poor? This is the really important question for all of us to wrestle with. What are your expectations? Do you kind of expect to keep hearing these stories? When your kids are your age, do you think they're going to be listening to these same bleak, overwhelming statistics and hearing these same sad stories? Do you think Levi is going to be listening to those same statistics and hearing those same stories? What are your expectations for the future of the poor? You know, right after the earthquake in Haiti, I was leading a medical response team there. And, you know, Haiti was a disaster before the earthquake, right? So in the aftermath of that earthquake, the devastation, I asked a Haitian man, do you think it's possible to end extreme poverty? The kind of poverty we see all around us, you know, these unmet basic human needs. And he hesitated. He said, yes, it's possible. And he went on to tell me how he thought that could happen. A few months after that, I was in rural Ethiopia, and I asked an Ethiopian man, do you think it's possible to bring an end to extreme poverty? You know, Ethiopia's seen famine and hardship and political oppression. You would think that if there's anywhere on the planet where a person would be justified for having low expectations for the future, being just a little fatalistic, a little bit, you know, wouldn't it be Haiti or Ethiopia, places like that, right, where there would be low expectations for the future? That Ethiopian man didn't hesitate either. He said yes, he thought it was possible to bring an end to extreme poverty and had his own ideas about that. I come back to the United States. I talk to agnostics and atheists, all right, economists who look at the numbers, and they say they believe it's possible to bring an end to extreme poverty, not just someday, but in this generation. But when I ask Christian leaders, and I've done this at numerous pastors' conferences, whether that's a possibility, I get a different kind of answer. I get this, well, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think we should help the poor, but I'm just not sure that's realistic. I think, you know, saying things like that, it's going to come back and bite us. That's where we're at. Now, the Barna survey also did questions surveying people about, do you think it's possible? And we know that there's a great deal of skepticism about that claim. About 70% of Christians not so sure about that claim that we can bring an end to extreme poverty. Now, I look at the 30% and say, we got 30%. That's pretty good. I don't know about you, but I'm encouraged by it. What are your expectations for the future of the poor? I need to tell you about a place where 20% of the babies die before their 5th birthday. It's a place where they die because they lack access to clean drinking water, a place where most of these women will watch at least one of their kids die. They often get pregnant as teenagers. It's a place with lack of access to food security. I'm talking about the United States of America. This is where we were not that long ago, about 200 years ago. But then things begin to change with new technologies like transportation and railroad, and communication technologies like the telephone, electricity, mechanized agriculture, the automobile, television, air travel, vaccines were invented, satellites, I was born, the computer, modems, cell phones, hybrid cars, and the pinnacle of all technology, the iPhone. We have come a long way. I mean, all those statistics, those were reality here in the U.S. not that long ago. We have come a long way. When we talk about what is possible in our time, one of the passages of Scripture that we have been called to, I believe this generation uniquely called to explore, is Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58 begins with a call against the religious hypocrisy of the day. It says, you know, you've got your daily fasting. Day after day, you seek me out. You seem eager to know my ways, as if you're a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. But it culminates in this statement: you cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. God is warning the people through the prophet, don't expect me to hear your prayers. Look at you. Your fasting ends in quarreling and in strife, and striking each other with wicked fists. You exploit all your workers and do as you please. So that's the situation. Now, the prophet is calling out against that. And the good thing is that the prophet doesn't stop there, and today's prophets don't either. There's a lot of critics of the church. That's an easy place to say. It's an easy place to be, to throw stones and criticize the hypocrisy. I'm sure a lot of us have done it. I know I've done that. But a true prophet never stops at that critique. The true prophet always turns to articulate that alternative vision of the future to say, guys, we can't stay here. And they'll call you the map. They'll say it like it is. They'll say, we cannot stay here. But they don't stop with that. They say, isn't this the way? And that's what happens in Isaiah 58 as he says, is not this the fast I've chosen? Is not this the fast I've chosen, to loose the chains of oppression and untie the yoke, to share your food with the hungry, You see the naked and clothe them, and not turn away from your own flesh and blood. And for me, verse 10 really summarizes that. It says, if you spend yourself in behalf of the hungry. Other translations, the English Standard Version says, if you pour yourself out on behalf of the hungry. New King James says, if thou draw out of thy soul. That is a call to a strong personal commitment on behalf of the hungry. If, then you will be called, your reputation, you will be called repairer of broken walls and restorer of streets and dwellings. How many Christian leaders do you know, and even in this room, and it's, I think, reflected the other night we were talking, I think you were talking about Gabe Lyons and Barna's book on Christian, and about the idea that, the first thing people think of when they hear evangelical is that they're hypocritical or judgmental, narrow-minded, those kinds of words. Boy, we as evangelicals, that's not a fun place to be, having that reputation. This is a promise about our reputation. You will be called repairers and restorers. So while we have Christian leaders feeling the burden of this perception of who we are, which I think is entirely false, or mostly false, Isaiah 58 is saying, if you live this way, if you live it out this way, this will be your reputation. You'll be the kind of people who fix things, There are other promises in Isaiah 58. If you haven't read it lately, read it again. I know it's familiar to you, but read it again and pray. God, what would you have me take out of this for our generation? Your light will break forth like the dawn. Your healing will quickly appear. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. You will call out for help, and I will say, here am I. You will be like a well-watered garden, a spring whose waters never fail. You will find your joy. Those are incredible promises, and they should be calling us forward to live out Isaiah 58 in our day. It is time for us to join with men like Martin Luther King Jr., who once said that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. So I'd like to talk about our reasons, at least evidence, behind these claims of what's possible in our time. The data I'm about to show you may surprise you. You might not have heard this before. Begin with lifespans. In the United States, we talked about the progress in the United States. In 1900, the average lifespan in the United States was 49 years. Today, it's at 79 years. We know about that story, our progress. But what about other places like India or China? In India, the average lifespan in 1900 was 24 years, and in China, it was 32. Today, in India, it's 64 years, and in China, it's 73 years. These countries have more than doubled the average length of their lives during the span of the 20th century. That's incredible progress. But what about really hard places? Places like Ethiopia. We talked about Ethiopia having seen famine and political oppression and hardship. In Ethiopia, the average lifespan in 1900 was 30 years, and today, it's 56 years. Even Ethiopia has nearly doubled the average length of its lifespans in that period of time. And a big part of the reason why those lifespans are increasing is because we're seeing dramatic improvements in child survival rates. The number of kids who die before their 5th birthday from preventable causes. We used to say 40,000 children die every day from hunger and preventable disease. In the 90s, that dropped to 33,000, and today, we're down to 21,000. We have cut in half the number of children dying from poverty-related causes in the span of a generation. And yet, most people don't seem to know about that progress. It is incredible progress, despite the fact that more kids are being born. And a big part of the reason why those kids are surviving is that they now have access to safe drinking water. Did you know that just since 1990, 600 million people have gained access to safe drinking water? 600 million since 1990. It's incredible progress. We used to have waterborne disease as the #1 killer of kids under the age of 5. Used to have. Another major killer of kids is vaccine-preventable diseases like measles. We invented a vaccine for measles over 40 years ago. Okay? And despite the fact that we've had that vaccine and that nearly all American kids are protected and we don't see a measles-related death here in the U.S., in the year 2000, 750,000 kids died of measles. A vaccine-preventable disease, just in the year 2000, 750,000 kids died. But look what happened between 2000 and 2008. there has been a 78% reduction in the number of children dying from measles simply because we're completing the work of immunizing those children. It's incredible progress. What about malaria? Malaria is a major killer of children. I get about 1 million kids who die from malaria every year. Did you know that just in the span of 6 years, between 2002 and 2008, 22 countries have cut their malaria rates in half? Do you know that? It's simple stuff. Insecticide-treated nets, we know about it. Better medicines, we know about those things. Simple strategies, they work. And we should be able to celebrate this progress. But if you're only going to remember one thing from all of this, I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers, and I could talk all day about indicators, about education rates, about participation in government, about female literacy. There are so many indicators we can look at, but if you're just going to take one thing away from this, remember this. In 1981, 52% of the world's population, half the planet, lived in extreme economic poverty. 52% in 1981. Today, we're at 26%. We have cut in half the percentage of people living in extreme economic poverty in the span of a generation. If we were still at 52%, there would be an additional 2 billion people living on less than $1.25 a day. That is incredible progress. So when people tell me they don't think it's possible to bring an end to extreme poverty, I say, okay, extreme poverty, let's define that. You sure? Yeah, it's just You're telling me that the things that happened in the last generation, that pace of progress, we can't do that? I mean, you should be the one defending why we have that pessimism. That's how I feel about it. The question is, what's it going to take to get to zero? What is it going to take to lift the last 26%? And this is where the answer, we believe, is it's going to take the church. It's going to take the church being the church. And all of those things that I shared at the beginning about the incredible wealth that's been entrusted to the people of God globally, and I was specifically telling you statistics from the U.S., about the new awareness, the awakening to the whole gospel, the seeing that the living out of faith is this both dimensions, and the effect of this new relationship, the fact that so many of the people in the pew, so to speak, they've now been there. They've been greeted with broad smiles and big hugs, and they've been called brother or sister by people who are living in extreme poverty. And that changes things. So what will it take to lift the last 26%? Now, I hope you will give me a little bit of room to not explain everything, because I'm not here with the just add water, will end extreme poverty solution. As Andy mentioned, although water's a good thing, we should add water. Think about it. The book Fast Living unpacks this a little bit. It's going to show you how the role of the church is a very fundamental level of influence, and philanthropy and what the nonprofit sector does, that matters. We all know that, part of that. But government has its role to play, and the business sector plays a huge role. So I'm not naive to the drivers of that progress. And I would say, though, that if we, as a community that's working in this space, could shift from an uninformed pessimism to an informed hopefulness, if we could learn to create a new culture of celebration, to thank and praise God for the good things that are happening, if we can bring clarity of thought about what is the nature of poverty and what are the strategies that do work, and not be too afraid of being specific or precise or concrete in some of that space. You know what I'm saying here? And bring that culture of celebration and optimism to the people, because you speak to a lot of people. We can move that needle. Let me tell you this. The Barna survey I'm talking about, they asked people, do you think the extreme global poverty rate has gotten better, stayed about the same, or it is worse than it was in 1990? 90% of the survey respondents, this was about 1,500 people that had the survey, said they thought it had gotten worse or stayed the same. 80% said it's worse and 10% said the same. Only 10% even knew that it had gotten better. And it's not just a little better. I mean, it'd be forgivable if we were like, you know, there's statistically significant improvements. No, this is radically better. And nobody knows. 90% don't know that. The same question on child survival rates. Just, The number of children who die every day from poverty-related causes, is that worse, about the same, or better today compared to 1990? 87% said it's worse or about the same. We've cut it in half. Then these survey participants were shown the data. They were asked, did you know that? And they're like, no, about 85%. It was funny, there was a 5% gap between those who didn't know in the first question and those who confessed they didn't know. But then they were said, if you saw this, ending extreme poverty is doable, would you be likely to? And you know what? Half of them said they would do significantly more. Do you understand the implications of that? If we wake up to that reality, to that possibility that extreme global poverty can be ended in our generation by celebrating the progress, giving glory to God for the good things that are happening, I believe that we can see a new level of engagement, unprecedented level of engagement amongst Christians who are already awakening to the cause, because God has given us everything we need to accomplish that. I mean, the first and most fundamental question is this: what does God want? We always begin with that, right? Anybody here think God wants children to die of poverty-related causes? I hope not. I hope nobody thinks God wanted Jacqueline to die. I hope nobody thinks that God wants these children who are currently starving, even today, that's his plan. Okay, God doesn't want it. We, his people, don't want it. Question 2, what can God do? Anything. We all know that, right? Well, with God, all things are possible. It's amazing to me that we live in a world where I talk to Christian leaders and I hear them expressing pessimism, but I'm talking to agnostics and atheists who are more hopeful about the future. I mean, we, the people who believe with God all things are possible, are somehow stuck. Believing, well, all things are possible, but probably not that way. Despite the fact that all the data is leaving the agnostics and the atheists in a more hopeful position than we're in. So we need to be a new source of hopefulness, of energy, of optimism, of truth, getting the facts out there, letting our people know. And I even wonder in our community, are we a little afraid of that? I mean, you know, maybe we say, look how bad it is, look how miserable it is, and you've been blessed to be blessed, and God commands it in the Bible, and so donate now. That kind of message, it's guilt, and it works, and we've seen it working for, 30, 40, 50 years. But what would happen if we said, you know what, are we afraid to say it's getting better? Are we afraid that they'll say, pressure's off? I don't think so. I think that this younger generation in particular is ready to be invited into something that they believe can actually work. That is the motivation behind what we're doing with Live 58. Again, the book Fast Living unpacks some of this. I'll tell you one final story. In 58, one of the things we've done is produce a film. And there's a way in which you can request a complimentary copy of the film. It's a small screening kit, some downloadable resources if you'd like to share it with people. It's a feature-length film, took 3 years of production. Filmed in some of the harshest places around the world, and one of them was this quarry. So I spent a week in this quarry, watching children hammer away at rocks all day long, where people living in bonded labor had no escape. And I got to tell you, first of all, I was in that quarry just wondering, how is it we're even in here with film crew? It's an illegal quarry. I mean, illegal according to laws in India, but not being enforced. The child labor conditions, the basically slavery is there. And those nights, I couldn't sleep because of the sound of the chisels and the hammers still chink, chink, all night, still echoing in my head. And I was in there feeling angry that this would be the case. And to see children whose lives are being crushed. So as you see the film, you'll see this segment. And I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences where you're in a place and you say, this isn't right. And then something has to be done about this. This little boy, Gopi, is one of the people whose life is featured in the film. And I couldn't, kind of like Jacqueline, stuck in my memory, I couldn't see Gopi and see his lack of opportunity and the way in which the injustice of that system was destroying this little guy's life. I couldn't think about Gopi without also thinking about Levi and thinking about our call. That we must work for a world where the Gopis that are trapped in whatever system, and there are all kinds of systems, have the same chance as the Levi's in the world. And that's what you do. And that's why it matters that we're working together to bring an end to extreme poverty, that's what the Accord Network is doing. The reason you're here, to learn from each other, to form new collaboration, to discover new sources of encouragement, to pray for each other, and as Beth encouraged us, to throw off the sin that is entangling us, that is preventing us from running the race marked out. The reason you're here is on behalf of that next generation that can see this better future. God willing, I believe He is. He's going to allow us by His grace to see that day come. This does continue in what you do. So I hope that you'll be encouraged. I hope that you'll see that with God all things are actually possible. With God all things are actually sustainable. Right? With God, and to recognize what He's doing already, to participate with Him in His work, that this will be the greatest opportunity of our generation, and that as your organization is finding new ways to engage with Christians, because Christians are waking up at an incredible rate, that we will bring a greater level of excellence to all of that work. Because God deserves that our best, right? That we would bring forward. Let me close with a prayer. Lord God, we thank You for this morning, the good things that You're doing in the world. Lord, we pray that You will increase our faith. Lord, we pray that we will seek Your will and seek dependence on You for what You have us do. Lord, that we would form new relationships, that we would be humble with one another, entering into relationships to partner, to collaborate, to learn, to improve. God, may we be the people who welcome with open arms all those Christians that are waking up to the cause and engaging. Even when we see things happening, Lord, that they feel like maybe they're not great development, help us to find a humble and patient way of working with all of that new energy and channeling it toward the greatest effectiveness. That people living in extreme poverty would be lifted, would be empowered, would be able to see themselves as You see them, Lord, to discover Your image in their own life and in life of one another, that they would build new trust, God, that they'd have protection, that they'd have opportunity, and that those of us who do have influence in places that matter and that shape the systems, God, that we would use that influence, that we would steward that influence in a way that honors You on their behalf, God. I pray Your blessing upon the continued meetings today. I pray for unity, and I pray for vision and energy, that the Accord Network would thrive and grow in service to You. In Jesus' name.
Maybe we can show our appreciation.